way in to decode the microscopic cities inside of us. If you've ever wondered how the fundamental architecture of life is constructed, organized, and sustained, well, you're in the right place. We're going to see exactly how it all works, layer by intricate layer. Here's our itinerary for today. 1. Discovery and cell theory. 2. Prokaryotes versus eukaryotes. 3. The cell size limit. 4. Inside eukaryotic cells. And 5. The cell cycle. Let's get right into it.
All right, part 1, discovery and cell theory.
So back in the 1600s, you've got Antony van Leeuwenhoek. Now, he was actually a Dutch shopkeeper, but the guy had a real knack for crafting lenses. He peers through his early microscope and spots these tiny, moving, single-celled organisms that he brilliantly called animalcules. Right around that same time, in 1665, an experimental scientist named Robert Hooke is looking at cork tissue and coins the term cell, just because the structures literally looked like tiny little boxes to him. Fast forward a bit to the late 1830s, and we have botanist Matthias Sleiden and zoologist Theodor Schwann teaming up to propose a unified cell theory. And then, in the late 1800s, Rudolf Virchow drops a massive piece of the puzzle with a very famous Latin phrase, omnis cellula cellula.
And all of those historical dominoes falling led us straight to the 3 main tenets of modern cell theory. Number 1, the cell is the fundamental unit of structure and function in living things. 2, all organisms are made up of 1 or more cells. And 3, cells only arise from pre-existing cells. This was huge, guys, because it completely crushed the old, kind of wild idea of spontaneous generation. You know, the belief that complex life could just magically spring up out of thin air.
Moving right along to part 2, prokaryotes versus eukaryotes. Now, no matter how simple or complex an organism is, and yes, that definitely includes you, every single cell shares 4 universal biological blueprints. Think of it as a basic starter pack. They all have a plasma membrane, which acts as a border control, separating the inside from the outside environment. They all have a jelly-like cytoplasm. They all contain DNA, which is the ultimate genetic instruction manual. And they all have ribosomes, which are absolutely crucial sites for synthesizing proteins.
But check out the contrast here. It's pretty striking. On the left, you've got the prokaryote. It's incredibly simple, super tiny, just 1 to 5 micrometers across, with its DNA just kind of floating right there in a central nucleoid region, all wrapped up in a rigid peptidoglycan cell wall. Then over on the right, the eukaryote is just massive by comparison, ranging up to 100 micrometers, and it is completely packed full of specific membrane-bound organelles, including a true, fully enclosed nucleus to keep its DNA safe and sound.
Which actually brings us perfectly to part 3, the cell size limit.
So here's a question for you. Why aren't cells the size of basketballs? Or, even the size of an apple? Why are pretty much all of them completely invisible to the naked eye? Well, it actually boils down to a strict, non-negotiable mathematical problem, a cell's surface area versus its volume.
If you dust off your high school geometry for a second, you'll remember that as an object grows, whether it's a sphere or a cube, its volume increases as a cube, right, to the power of 3. But its surface area only increases as a square, to the power of 2. What this means in real terms is that the internal volume grows much, much faster than the outside surface area. So if a cell gets too big, its plasma membrane just simply won't have enough surface area to rapidly diffuse nutrients in and pump waste products out. It would literally starve or, worse, poison itself.
So what's the biological workaround to this strict physical limit? Well, to survive, a cell either has to divide to stay small and efficient, or it has to compartmentalize. By developing specific internal organelles to handle tasks super efficiently, a cell can actually grow quite a bit larger without losing its functionality. And this brilliant evolutionary adaptation is exactly what led to the highly sophisticated eukaryotic cells we're looking at today.
Okay, part 4. Let's take a tour inside eukaryotic cells.
Let's start right downtown at the cell's headquarters, the eukaryotic nucleus. Because it's eukaryotic, remember, it has a quote-unquote true nucleus.
It's wrapped in a double-membrane nuclear envelope made of inner and outer phospholipid bilayers, and it's punctuated with these little nuclear pores that carefully control molecular traffic. Inside, floating in the semi-solid nucleoplasm, you have your linear chromosomes of DNA safely locked away. You'll also find the nucleolus in there, working overtime to condense chromatin and churn out ribosomes. Moving out into the cytoplasm, we find the rest of this bustling microscopic city's infrastructure. You've got the mitochondria, those oval-shaped energy factories pumping out ATP. You've got the endoplasmic reticulum acting as a massive manufacturing plant, modifying proteins and synthesizing lipids. Then there's the Golgi apparatus, which is basically a busy post office, sorting, tagging, packaging, and shipping out those products. Don't forget the peroxisomes, the waste management facilities using oxidation reactions to break down fatty acids and detoxify poisons. And finally, vacuoles and vesicles, acting as the storage warehouses and tiny transport trucks zipping all over the city. But just like real cities, not all cellular cities are zoned the same way. Animal and plant cells actually have some really striking structural differences. Animal cells have distinct features like centrosomes to help organize microtubules near the nucleus and lysosomes that basically act as the cell's internal digestive system. Plant cells, on the other hand, need a totally different architecture. They require rigid cell walls for structural support, chloroplasts so they can harness solar energy through photosynthesis, and a very specialized structure just for regulating water. This setup creates a completely different microscopic environment. Notice that massive space dominating the middle of the plant cell. That's the large central vacuole. It's pumped full of cell sap, and it plays an absolutely critical role in regulating water pressure against that thick outer cell wall. That is literally what allows plants to stand upright and keep their shape even when environmental conditions start fluctuating wildly.
And finally, that brings us to part 5, the cell cycle.
Now, in eukaryotes, cellular reproduction isn't just some sudden, spontaneous split. No, it is a highly regulated, continuous, and cyclic process. It's a precise rhythm of growth, DNA replication, and eventually cell division.
The cell actually spends a massive amount of its life in interphase, which is broken down into 3 parts. First is the G1 phase. This is a period of intense biochemical activity where the cell is gearing up. Next is the S phase, standing for synthesis. And this is the big one. It's where the all-important DNA replication happens. Then you hit the G2 phase, which is another gap period for secondary growth and final prep. Only after all of this meticulous behind-the-scenes preparation does the cell finally enter the M phase, or mitosis. This is the dramatic part where it splits equally separated chromosomes and actually divides the cell itself into 2 identical daughter cells. It's crazy to think about, but this exact cycle is happening millions of times over in your body right now, whether you're healing a scraped knee or just growing your hair out.
And really, that brings this whole explainer full circle, right back to Rudolf Virchow's famous realization, omnis cellula ex cellula. All cells only arise from pre-existing cells. The cell cycle is literally an unbroken chain of biological division, a chain that links every single living thing today straight back through the deep history of life on Earth. But I want to leave you with one final kind of mind-bending thought to consider. If modern cell theory universally dictates that every single cell comes from a pre-existing cell through this continuous unbroken cycle of division, how exactly did the very first cell originate? It's a huge, fascinating question about the absolute origins of the biological blueprint we've just been exploring, and definitely something to ponder until our next explainer. Thanks so much for learning with me today, and I'll catch you next time.